not every graph database needs to solve every use case. Some can be more focused on analytical processes, and some can be focused more on transactional processes. And the problem is that sometimes, you can't get both, right? And so having a tool that provides that consistent experience across the board just means you're going to be able to, first of all, kind of work across all your database instances like consistently, but also that you have like a level playing field basically for comparing the technology.
Welcome to Graph Geeks in Discussion. I'm Amy Hodler. Today we're joined by Arthur Bigeard, the founder of G.V, and we'll discuss his search for an easy-to-use graph client that led him to create a tool with a universal graph experience. So welcome for joining. Thank you for joining us, Arthur. To kick things off, can you share a little bit about what motivated you to start G.V and just tell us a little bit about it?
Of course. So thanks for having me, first of all.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'm Arthur. I'm the creator of G.V. So really for me, it's quite simple. I've kind of started out as the average, first-time user of graph databases a
Mhm.
few years ago. Simply put, I was tasked with putting together a small proof of concept
Mhm.
using something called Janus Graph, which I was not really familiar with at the time. And in fact, I wasn't even familiar with graph databases as a whole. And so the entire sort of history of GW has been revolving around this moment where I was tasked with discovering this new technology and feeling like I was basically lacking the tools
Mhm.
that I got used to, both as a student and as a professional working
Mhm.
with relational databases. And so I've set out, from this experience to create the graph database client, the integrated development environment, whatever we want to call it, for those graph databases, so that people like me a few years back then that came into graph databases not really knowing what to do have
Mhm.
a tool that they can use both to learn how graph databases
Mhm.
work, how their language works, but also kind of show off what they're actually doing with graph databases to other people in their team and stakeholders in particular. That's
Mhm.
essentially how GW was born. It didn't happen overnight, of course. There's been a lot of work that's been poured into it over the years, but that's how it started.
Hmm. And so is this mostly, well, tell us who the main audience or who you had in your head when you were developing this and what they might typically use this product for in the course of their typical day.
Yeah, so I mean, to be honest, I built a tool that I want to use myself first of
Mhm.
all, and
Mhm.
me myself, I'm a developer. I've always
Mhm.
been working on projects where I have to kind of touch a little bit of everything, and that typically involves
Mhm.
working with databases as well. And so the product is very much intended for those developers, first of all,
Mhm.
that need to work with graph databases, and we're really talking about your day-to-day tasks
Mhm.
as far as a graph database user,
Mhm.
both whether you're a beginner or a seasoned veteran of graph databases, you're going to need something, a tool to write your queries, get your autocomplete, get that little productivity help
Mhm.
to write it faster. You want to be able to test your queries as well, make sure that they're outputting what you expect. And for that, we provide all sorts of visuals that give you a better idea of what your data
Mhm.
and what your queries actually output. Plus anything that revolves around actually reporting on what's in your data. And there's
Mhm.
many stages to a graph project. We've got the beginning, of course, which is going to be learning graph databases potentially like I had to, and then starting to put some data inside, trying to see what that data looks like, how it's structured,
Mhm.
writing initial queries, maybe testing out performance as well. If you're
Mhm.
evaluating different databases. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got people that have their enterprise knowledge graph all ready to go,
Mhm.
and they've put a lot of work into it, and now they need a tool to just start running reports on it and seeing what's in it and showcasing potential, insights from their data, either to themselves or to other people in the
Mhm.
team. And so that kind of aims to cover a lot of the early stages of graph
Mhm.
projects, but we're also foraying into covering the later stages of those
Mhm.
projects where we need to actually perform some form of business intelligence effectively.
Mhm. So I know you support various different and many different types and flavors of graph databases, but is there something in common that developers struggle with when they're working with graphs? Because obviously you decided to build a tool because there wasn't something that suited you. So is there something you've noticed that's in common?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, there are many. challenges, I think, to adoption.
Mm,
And to be fair, that's not necessarily just true of graph databases. I think it's,
mm,
challenges are generally true of databases as a whole. The only difference is
mm,
that relational database, chances are you're going to have, those baked into your education at some
mm,
point and potentially in your general work experience because they're so ubiquitous. Whereas graph databases, you're going to come up to an additional challenge, which is going to be your learning curve. And so that's
mm,
probably the
mm,
first sort of challenge that I see with graph databases is, okay, well, what is a graph database? And I find out a good answer to what is a graph database is to just visually show what it might look like, which is
mm,
ultimately,
mm,
I'm being very simplistic here, but connections, dots and lines,
mm,
with some information attached to each of those. Another challenge, of course, and again, that remains true of most databases is, how do you ingest data
mm,
into your database? So, typically we'll be
mm,
talking stuff like ETL pipelines and such.
mm,
It's not something that we provide, much at all for, but what we do provide is the ability, once you've ingested your data to start querying it and visualizing it and checking out the structure of your graph data schema and such and such. And so that again allows to get a better
mm,
understanding of like what you're actually doing. Not to mention test the performance of your queries very rapidly rather than having to write code that is then going to test your queries. You can just pop them on G.V, run them and see how long it took to run. You can run your profilings and all that stuff based on native features of the various databases we support. And then the last thing is, well, look, once you've got your data in there, you're going to want to do something with it, right? One step is, of course, to put the data on your database to solve a specific use case. For graph databases, of course, there's some very, very popular use
mm,
cases like fraud detection, supply chain management, etc. But then you're going to want to just kind of
mm,
like actually get insights from that data,
mm,
and we'll also try and provide tools to help report on that information. And I think the important final challenge and something that I don't think gets discussed much is those are technical challenges, but another big challenge
mm,
you're going to come up with specifically, I think, with graph databases and other newer technologies. So you're going to need to convince someone potentially at your organization that this is the right thing to use,
mm,
right? Why are we choosing graph databases? Why aren't we just doing relational databases like everyone does all the time, sort
mm,
of? And G.V is a really, really good tool to kind of just demonstrate potentially to a less technical audience as well, what your graph data looks
mm,
like and what it effectively achieves for your organization.
mm,
And I think it works. In fact, I've heard that many times with customers that they've started out a proof of concept on a project that leverages
mm,
graph data and graph databases with G.V, and they kind of went from POC to production in just like 2 or 3 months with kind of the entire life cycle, if you will, of the project, which is scaling up, like understanding the
mm,
language, understanding the concepts, prototyping, and then refining the
mm,
data and somewhere along the line or throughout demonstrating the progress made on this project by visually like showing to your stakeholders, this is our
mm,
graph data, this is what it looks like, and
mm,
this is what it tells us visually as well. These are most of the challenges that I've personally experienced.
mm.
And I think many that have either already adopted graph databases or are about to adopt graph databases are going to run into as well.
So, in talking about ingest and ETL and POCs, going from POC to production, I there's a lot of vendor. I know you support a lot of different databases, and I think we should share a few of those. I don't know if the whole list, but share at least some of that. But a lot of those database providers also have their own ingest capabilities or ETL capabilities, but you work alongside them. So can you explain why somebody might choose to use G.V alongside one of these vendors that maybe have some of their own tools and capabilities as well to help people get up and going? Like, how does that partnership or that pairing work?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, I guess just to answer your first questions, we do
Yeah.
support quite a lot of graph database technologies. I'm not going to list them all because I think we're coming up to about 18 with at least two more
Yeah,
on the
yeah.
way. But generally speaking, we support the entire Apache Tinkerpop ecosystem.
Hmm.
So, tools like, or databases like Janus Graph or Amazon
Hmm.
Neptune, for instance, we also support I'll call it the Cypher ecosystem. I know it's a bit
Hmm.
more complicated than that, but
Hmm.
it's databases like Neo4j, MemGraph, or
Hmm.
Kuzu. And then other databases like dgraph, for instance, which is its kind of own kind of scalable database as well. And we're working on new ones such as Oracle Graph and DuckPGQ, for instance. Now, with all that put aside, when it comes to ETL specifically, I think there's two things that are happening with ETL. The first one is, ultimately when it comes to ingesting data into your database, the graph database providers has a big responsibility in making that happen, because ultimately if they don't provide efficient data ingestion tools, whether it be supporting, efficient formats like Parquet, for instance, or JSON, etc., and something that runs fast, that will act as a barrier to ingestion of data. But then also the other side of it is, well, we don't always have the data just in the right kind of shape that it needs to be in to go directly in your graph database. And this is a bit of a gap, I guess, in the industry. There is one specific tool that I'll briefly mention that kind of does a lot of that, which is graph.build, which is actually also built in the UK, not by me, but by people that we're partnering with a little bit. And that provides some answers to these challenges. And so really to summarize, it's like the database needs to provide an efficient way to import data, and third-party providers or first-party providers, the graph database providers needs to then provide, effective tools to structure the data from various sources, aggregate it, turn it into formats that we can then ship off to the graph database. Now, when it comes to graph database providers specifically, there's lots of them, and they're kind of very different business models, I guess, and organization sizes. Of course, Neo4j, which is kind of the market leader, I guess, and they have, a well fleshed out ecosystem that kind of covers a lot of these use cases, both on the graph database size, the ingestion, but then also the tools to support the ingestion. And you have other databases that are open source and not necessarily getting as much contribution, that sometimes just want to focus on building the graph database itself and maximizing performance and ingestion processes. And so these providers can rely on companies and tools such as G.V to kind of plug the gap in the ecosystem so that they can come up against more mature, better funded databases without fear of not having the ecosystem that goes with it. And this is, I think, a way to really challenge, the industry as a whole to maximize the offering and the performance for those graph databases. I think ultimately with more providers, they are doing more unique things to provide crazy performance. And I'm thinking, for instance, about Kuzu or MemGraph, and there's many others. It really raises the whole standards for the industry. So I think it's a great way to just provide users with better products and a better user experience. So I'll be focusing, for instance, on the user experience. That's sort of my gig with G.V. And then other database providers will then be able to focus on performance and APIs and such, because they know that they have, for instance, G.V sort of around there to plug that gap a little bit.
One of the things that whenever I see G.V, I think developer experience. Like it's all about what a developer would need to get up and going, to try things out. And I also like the fact that you can get a common experience across different backends. So if I were testing out, 3 or 4 different backends, having a common way to look at them and interact with them is something that I would want, just to keep things straight and keep the comparisons well-founded, I guess. So
and I think actually on that point, it's worth mentioning briefly. Organizations don't always just stick to the one graph database. They might have genuine use cases for using more than one. I mean, you've got now embedded graph databases again, like Kuzu, but then you've got server-hosted ones, like Neo4j. You've got ones that are scaling, globally better than others, and not every graph database needs to solve every use case. Some can be more focused on analytical processes, and some can be
Mm-hmm.
focused more on transactional processes.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is that sometimes, you can't get both, right? And so having a tool that
Yeah.
provides that consistent experience across the
Mm-hmm.
board just means you're going to be able to, first of all, kind of work across all your database
Mm.
instances like consistently, but also that you have like a level playing field basically for
Mm.
comparing the technologies when you're trying to pitch internally to your organization a specific type of graph database technology.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it is a lot easier when you have a tool like G.V that can highlight it at the
Mm.
same level, really, for instance, as Neo4j and using Neo4j browser, or even just if
Yeah.
you're comparing two internally, it
Mm-hmm.
really provides consistency, which is
Mm-hmm.
super important.
I think that's a really important point. I'm glad we got to that because to something you said about different types of graph infrastructure being good for transactional, analytical, and if you're talking about even analytics, are you talking about global analytics? You're talking about query analytics, and the different technologies are actually good for very different things, and having a window into a common window into those different capabilities, because I do believe that's something that I'm seeing, and I do believe that's something that will continue, is that we're going to see this proliferation of graph capabilities from different vendors inside of companies. It's not going to be like one graph technology only for a company. I think those days are over. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I do want to get to something that I have noticed. There's been a lot of news lately around G.V. It seems like you're just doing a lot. I can hardly keep up. What's can you summarize a little bit about what you've been up to?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, GW is a product that I've been working on part-time for a long
Hmm.
time. I went
Hmm.
full-time in June and I hired a junior developer. So we've basically been able to kind of scale our ambitions.
Uh-huh.
We started out as this Apache Tinkerbell only tool, and
Mm.
in the last 9 months, we've added support for, I think, 7 or 8 graph databases at least,
Hmm.
and 3 new query languages. So, first one, of
Hmm.
course, being Cypher with Neo4j, Amazon Neptune, memgraph, and Kuzu. We've also added support for dgraph and dgraph query
Hmm.
language, and support for Google Spanner Graph. So that's all happened in a very short period of time, and that's just the databases we've added.
Mm.
We've added tons of features as
Mm.
well. We're very busy, that's for sure. But we're also working on a bunch of other stuff. I think the
Hmm.
industry as a whole is evolving in a lot of really interesting directions.
Yeah.
Like you said, that there's not just one graph database that's going to solve all the problems. But we
Hmm.
do have now is different solutions that are going to address different problems, for different use cases. So, for instance, when it comes to spanner graph, we have now the ability to create a graph on top of relational data,
Hmm.
which is a sort of trend I think that we're seeing evolve now because it's appearing in other places. You got Oracle Graph, and that's not actually
Hmm.
news. Oracle Graph has
Hmm.
technically been there before, I believe. We have a community extension to DuckDB called DuckPGQ, which brings SQL 2023
Hmm.
support to DuckDB. So SQL 2023, I think, for those
Hmm.
that maybe missed this, is the latest version of the standard for SQL that actually introduces property graph functionality to SQL. So it's like, well,
Hmm.
you have your relational data, and now you can just create a property graph on
Hmm.
top of it. And the interesting
Hmm.
part of that is that there's no ETL requirement suddenly because you're already building on top of existing data. And if there's an ETL requirement, it's going to be into your relational database, which has probably existed for decades and
Yeah.
has extremely mature ETL processes available.
Mm.
And so that creates a sort of big sort of highway to adoption, I think,
Mm.
for graph database technologies in general.
Mm.
We've also got stuff like PuppyGraph, a sort of graph
Hmm.
querying engine that sits on top of aggregated data sources.
Hmm.
Again, no ETL. You just deploy PuppyGraph, you connect it to your
Hmm.
various data sources. And that could be data lakes, it can be, BigQuery, for instance, or Snowflake or Databricks. And you have a property graph on top
Hmm.
of it now that you can query using granular Cypher. Again, that's going to be really easy adoption. And of course, last but not least, we've got GQL that's also been,
Hmm.
officially standardized now, and that's bringing a
Hmm.
fully standard querying language to graph database as a whole. So there's these like really big pushes, I think, that are going to drive adoption, making it a lot easier for users not just to stand up their graph, but also then to query them with a common set of features that is really starting to show up across all these graph databases. And so you can more easily move from one to the other or work with different ones for different use cases.
So you've described, I think, some major trends, and there's just a lot changing in the graph market and the tech market in general right now. How would you characterize? I think you've described it a little bit, but if we were to kind of zoom out a little and characterize some of those the changes that are rippling through the graph market, how would you characterize that for people listening?
I mean, for me, it's super exciting. That's probably the main thing I have to say. It's like
Mm-hmm.
all these changes that are happening now, I think signify a really increased interest, from
Mm-hmm.
institutional players like Google, for instance, with
Mm-hmm.
Spanograph. I mean, it's one of the big like free cloud computing companies. Amazon Neptune, which has been there for a really long
Mm-hmm.
time, provides this really unique combination of RDF and LPG, and it's kind of been one of the first to do
Mm-hmm.
that. Overall, it's just going to almost force organizations, I want to say, to like realize there's something there. There's the product that you
Yeah.
can now easily deploy. It's available in
Yeah.
all sorts of flavors
Yeah.
throughout whatever cloud computing or infrastructure you're tied to, because we all know
Mm-hmm.
that organizations sometimes take a very, single view on what technology they want to adopt and where from. And, having
Mm-hmm.
all that available means more people are going to adopt it. And for me personally, that means a lot of work, right? If we're building the tooling that helps interact with those technologies, and now
Yeah.
suddenly we've got lots more technologies to provide
Mm-hmm.
support for as well. And these are people that are going to come from the relational database world. And these
Mm-hmm.
people are going to have high expectations because they've kind of been blessed, so to speak, with an ecosystem that has had literally decades to evolve and turn into, the most mature database ecosystem
Mm-hmm.
there is, simply because they've been there the
Mm-hmm.
longest. I mean, we kind of forget all of this stuff, like the graph database clients and all the tools around ETL and all that, like those existed before graph databases, and they're being brought to
Mm-hmm.
graph databases because we all know that's how you support the ecosystem. And so, the
Mm-hmm.
mission here is to really provide that push, in terms of tooling, so that users have what they need so that they can actually not just try these technologies, but successfully implement their proof of concept and then
Mm-hmm.
successfully implement their projects in production as well.
Mm. So I wrote down or three things as you're speaking. So I'm going to correct me if I'm wrong, but to kind of quickly summarize, it feels like right, and I would agree with this in the graph market. A lot of institutional interest in and funding and effort in graphs. This experimentation, if you will, on different types of graphs or graph engines, graph databases, graph query engines versus graph analytics. So these different approaches to graph. And then the third one would be the effort at reducing barriers to entry or adoption. Getting accessibility. So those are the three big trends that I heard you talk about. How are those impacting your focus areas? I know you're very focused on, adoption and experience.
In terms of adoption itself and the work that it gives me,
Mm-hmm.
for me, it's really about being compatible with the graph databases, first of all, and then also being compatible with the querying languages. Again, kind of coming back
Mm-hmm.
to the argument about relational
Mm-hmm.
databases,
Yeah.
they've been spoiled with a really rich ecosystem. So that means when someone is going to want to use GQL,
Mm-hmm.
for instance, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're going to ask, well, where's my GQL query editor, right? How
Mm-hmm.
do I write GQL queries? How do I validate that the syntax is correct?
Mm-hmm.
How do I get autocomplete? This is the type of work that we're being
Mm-hmm.
kept busy with. Because ultimately, and that comes from personal experience, but I think it's a shared experience across all developers and graph database users, you want the tools that are going
Mm-hmm.
to help you to make the most of your time and
Mm-hmm.
of your database. And if those tools don't exist, then it can create frustration for users. So our job really is to remove that
Mm-hmm.
frustration, make it as easy as possible to adopt, and that means writing proper autocomplete engines for the different querying languages. It means make it easy to run those queries and to visualize the results and to share those visuals, which is something that you do, even in relational data or document data. Like you're going to show a table to someone, this is where the data is, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So we just want to make sure we've got all that in place so that when the droves of users arrive, they're not, being left out without a proper, like get in the car basically. If you want to walk, you're going to take a lot longer. Just get G.V on your device or deploy it online, and then you're going to have a tool that just accelerates your adoption and means that you're going to be able to demonstrate it to other people very easily.
So, kind of thinking back to, or thinking maybe forward to this year, what in the space is most exciting to you? Whether it's fun or just something that you think is going to help users.
Yeah, I mean, so like obviously everything we've discussed about these new technologies that really help adoption for me is really exciting. One thing I'm really excited about, and that's really just more as a developer, is like someone who's trying to make good tools, is trying to bring in, we're focused a lot on developers, but I'm aware also that once you've put your project in production, you're gonna then want to just start driving insights. And so what I'm really excited about is trying to start creating proper business intelligence tooling for graph databases as well. So we're focused quite a lot on the early stages of graph projects, and the fact that there is some tooling missing, I believe. I think that also holds true, at the end of the pipeline where you've got data that is deployed maturely in production, and you just want to be able to run reports, perhaps for less technical users. Where's the Power BI for graph databases? That's what I'm really excited about, because now that we're seeing a lot more successful graph projects, really, because that's what it is. The more adoption we're seeing, the more success we're seeing as well. We want to make sure that we were able to sustain that success by not just getting people through the door, and actually giving them like the long-term maintenance effectively, like the tools that are going to allow them to continue driving value from their data. I think this is really where I'm focusing now, and this is where I'm seeing the most potential down the line as well.
Is there how can people follow up or take a little deeper dive into what you're working on, or try it out? What are their next steps if they want to learn
Yeah,
more?
of course. So, I mean, first of all, the easiest way to try G.V is to just go ahead and download it and install it. So G.V is gdotv.com. It's a software executable that's available for Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. We're really built for simplicity. If you want to try to get set up with your database in G.V, it should take less than 5 minutes. You can download G.V, install it, connect to your database, which usually takes less than a minute, and boom, you're ready to go. You can query your database, you can visualize the data, you can do a whole bunch of other things that we're not going to get into. We've also got a web application version that's available on AWS Marketplace. That's for a multi-user environment. We're actually working to make that available outside of AWS Marketplace. And then if you just want to find out what's going on with G.V in general, we regularly post on LinkedIn. So typically we'll post, updates of what's been done with the software. We're posting about what's coming up in the software as well, and just general conversations and presentations that we're doing or having. So on LinkedIn, it is also G.V GDOTV. Technically, the name is a bit longer. I've kind of tacked a bunch of stuff at the end of it, but if you just look for that, you'll find it. And if you just follow us on LinkedIn, you'll be able to find out pretty much everything that we're up to. We post weekly, and we love just doing our little dev preview where we just tease a little bit of what we've been working on with a little visual. Probably should have more coming up in a couple of weeks, actually. So yeah, that's generally this is how you try G.V, and this is how you find out more about us and what we're up to.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And for those of you that are going to be at the Knowledge Graph conference, both Arthur and myself will be there. So looking forward to seeing you in person, Arthur. You should stop and get a hold of Arthur. I believe you'll be on. I can't remember. Are you presenting? What
Yeah.
is that?
So, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm super excited about Knowledge Graph
Yeah.
Conference. So I'll be there for the whole
Yeah.
week. I'm going to bring Joe as
Okay.
well. So Joe is the junior developer. You'll get to
Nice.
meet the whole
Yeah.
team. We're going as a sponsor, actually. So, I'll
Okay.
be doing a lightning talk, I believe, on Thursday. I'll need to double check.
Okay.
And then we'll be, both attending presentations because there's going to be tons of interesting stuff. And for me, there's like lots and lots of people I want to meet. But we'll also be, at a stand as well, being able to demo the software and just talk through use cases and other things that we're
Mm,
working on. So, pop by our stand or find us on presentations. We'll actually just be wearing t-shirts. That will just make
that's
it very clear who we are as well. So it'll be very easy to spot, I'm sure. But yeah, we'll be there the whole week, and
wonderful.
I'm super excited for it.
Wonderful. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you. Thanks for your time. And we will have to leave it there for now. And we will see you, or I will see you in a couple weeks. Hopefully, more of us will be able to get together and hang out.
That's right. Thank you very much.